All right, what's up guys? In this video, I'm gonna be giving you my first impressions on the brand new GX2 Power Hybrid from Gearbox. This is the power model follow-up from the last GX2, and this might just be Gearbox's best paddle they've ever made. And in my opinion, it's really not even close. Now in this video, I am only going to be talking about the Hybrid because that's the one I have put some time on, but they do also have an elongated model, and when we do our full review on August 7th, we will have information about that paddle. As always, if you want the specs, those will be on screen now. So as of right now, the GX2 Power is on pre-order, and I'll have a link down in the description if you want to get in line for that, but the full release is going to be on August 7th. The price of these paddles will be $280, and you can use code PBStudio to shave off 10% with your order. Gearbox historically has not done a lot of discount codes, so it is nice that they're offering that, especially on their more premium paddle. But now I'm gonna go over what has actually changed from the last GX2, because if you watched my full review on that, you'll know that I felt like it was a pretty polarizing paddle. Either you were gonna love that paddle or hate it. And one of the reasons for that was the paddle was so dampened. It's probably one of the most muted, lack of vibration paddles that I have ever played in pickleball. Well, I think Gearbox heard that feedback loud and clear and then made some changes with the new GX2 Power. Now there's more feedback to it. I wouldn't call it an extreme amount, but certainly more than the last GX2, and there's more sound to it. Now it kind of has that thud Gen 3 sound that you're used to with paddles like the Joola Pro 4. And both of those updates are very welcome in my opinion. I think with the sound, it's a lot easier to tell how hard you're hitting it. Sound is one of those interesting things in pickleball that I don't think people realize how much they rely on the sound of a paddle when it hits the ball to gauge certain shots. And then also by adding in more feedback, it just makes it feel a little more connected to the ball. You know how you hit it. It doesn't feel like, oh, I hit that and thought I hit it cleanly, but it actually wasn't clean at all. Now it feels a lot more obvious. Now the next very welcome change, especially for the last handful of Gearbox releases, is the swing weights are lower and finally in a great place. So if you guys remember with the Pro Power Elongated, or really any of the recent Gearbox releases, all of the swing weights, especially the elongated models, have been very heavy. While on the Hybrid, the swing weight is 111, which is a little lower than most hybrids, and the elongated is 117. So thankfully, gone are the days of the ridiculously heavy gearboxes, and I'm very pumped about it. And on top of that, the icing on the cake is this is Gearbox's best sweet spot. You know, in the past, it's kind of always been this joke that Gearbox sweet spots are always lacking. They didn't quite compete with polymer cores, and I think that's finally not true anymore. In fact, I personally would put this sweet spot up with the best of the best that's out there right now. And I know that's a pretty bold claim, but I've been hitting quite a few paddles recently, and whenever I pick up the GX2 Power, sweet spot is not something I think about at all. There's not a moment where I'm hitting and I go, oh, the ball just didn't come off quite right. Now, of course, I don't want to oversell this. I'm not saying it is literally the best sweet spot in pickleball, but it is to the point now where I'm not thinking about it, and that is a great sign for sweet spot performance. If you watched my GX2 review, you'll know that one of the things I was kind of iffy about was it didn't really make sense to take their Hybrid and basically make it skinnier. Now, their argument was, this is better for maneuverability, but to me, the stability that you sacrificed wasn't worth the hand speed gain. Now with this one, it is wider, it's a lower swing weight, and the sweet spot feels better. And as far as the handle length goes, I would say it's very comparable to an 11624 Vapor Power. It might even have just a smidge more space for a two-handed backhand because of how the neck tapers, but overall, it's very similar to that paddle if you've used one of those and are familiar with that handle length. And then the last thing, as the name implies, this paddle has more power. You're gonna hear more about this comparison in just a minute, but I would basically put this on par with, if not more power than the Joola Pro 4. So for those of you who wanted a power paddle from Gearbox, this is absolutely gonna be the one. So now that we've got the changes out of the way from the original GX2, let's talk about how it actually plays. I've actually already taken this paddle to a tournament, and I felt like I played great with it. The only thing in that tournament that I felt a little more iffy on was my returns. There was just a handful of returns that I ended up sailing long, and I didn't even feel like I swung that big. And then the second thing would be drops. I think they were a little bit more tricky for me to dial in. Now, as I've played with this paddle more and more, I feel like it's starting to get easier and easier, but I do find that it's still a little bit touchy. So if you're someone who really depends a lot on the paddle helping you with control and you're not looking for purely power, I do think that would be the drawback of this paddle, is that control is gonna be a little trickier to dial in. However, I don't think it's terrible, especially since this paddle has a bigger sweet spot. I think that makes a really big difference in being able to place the ball where you want it. Because historically with other gearboxes, when you would miss outside of that sweet spot, the drop off in performance was so substantial that a lot of the times the ball was just gonna hit the ground long before it got to the net. But anyways, just keep that in mind. Control might be a little bit tricky. In fact, in that tournament, once we got out of pool play, I ended up busting out the Joola Pro 4 Scorpius 14mm and felt like I had better control with that than I did the GX2 Power. And when you're switching to a Joola Pro 4 for more control, that's just kind of a weird thing to have to say. But I have always kind of felt like the 14mm specifically have been on the easier side to control for a power paddle. Now, one of the other big upgrades that the GX2 Power has is they did add a bit more texture. It's nothing crazy. There are a lot of paddles out there that still feel grittier than this. But again, historically, gearboxes have been pretty smooth and their power paddles have been on the harder side to shape the ball. A lot of times those paddles had more power than they were able to generate spin, so I always felt like it was harder to keep the ball in. Well, with these new ones, the RPM on the hybrid was coming in around 2256 RPM, so I really don't think anyone's gonna be complaining about spin on the GX2 Power. The feel on the GX2 Power is very Gen 3-esque. You know how in the past, gearbox paddles have had this very distinct feel, you knew you were hitting a gearbox, they didn't always feel the best? All of that is pretty much gone here. So let's just kind of go over some of the different shots and how they felt with the GX2 Power. One of the first things I would say was pretty standout to me was the serve. One, because of the shape I could put on the ball, but second was just, I didn't feel like I had to swing that hard to consistently get the ball to go deep. The power to me off of serves felt very easy and I wasn't that concerned about like, oh, I really gotta put a ton behind this to get it to go deep. So I think that was a pro. When it came to thirds, I did find that those were a little bit more touchy than I'm used to. I had to concentrate just a little bit more to keep them down and not give someone a higher fourth that they could easily attack. I think that's something that can and probably will be dialed in with time, but I definitely wouldn't call it an easy paddle for third. Now, resets, oddly enough, didn't feel that bad, and I think a lot of that is probably because of the sweet spot size. I just felt like compared to older gearboxes, I had a lot more margin to work with when it came to a reset, and I didn't find that I was just popping up my resets so high that I couldn't get to the kitchen. For some reason, that shot in particular didn't feel too bad. And then around the net for dinking, I honestly thought this was fine. I think backhand dinks in particular for me felt very nice. Forehand dinks is kind of my sketchier side of dinking. I think they felt about equal with other paddles that I've been testing recently, but I did find that if I didn't have my paddle face correct, it was a lot easier to pop those up just a little bit higher than I would usually prefer for myself. And then for hands, this is where I do think the paddle excels. It's very easy to hit a counter and have the ball go by them very quickly. I don't think you have to give a lot. You can kind of just put your paddle out, do a nice compact swing, and you get plenty of pop on that counter. So I think just like the Pro 4, this paddle does very well at the net and you'll have plenty of pace when you're hitting a counter or trying to put a ball over. What I will say for hands battles though, is you do probably have to be a little bit cognizant of how big you're swinging. I think because it's more poppy and powerful, you just don't need a big swing. I would find myself going for some of these larger swings that I know I shouldn't do anyways, and then the ball would just go flying way past them. So do be warned that you're gonna wanna be a little bit more compact with your swings if you're using this paddle. Now I wanna talk about comparing this paddle to a Joola Pro 4, because in my opinion, these paddles are neck and neck, and they're basically direct competitors to each other. The paddle shape that I ended up comparing the GX2 Power to was the Hyperion, and specifically the 16mm model. The first thing I would say is that feel is pretty comparable between both. I think they have very similar feelings, but the way I would try and describe it is almost like, you know how some iPhones in past years have had sharp edges and then other years it's rounded edges? That's kind of how I feel about the Joola versus the Gearbox. The Gearbox feels like it has the rounded edges and the Joola has sharper edges. And what I mean by that is the feel on the Joola feels sharper, maybe a little bit more harsh, not necessarily in a bad way, but there's a little bit more feedback. And then with the Gearbox, it's a little bit more plush, it's a tiny bit more dampened, but it feels like it's in a similar ballpark. It basically just feels like if you rounded off some of the harsher vibrations you might feel, that's how you would end up with the GX2 Power. So kind of a long way to say that the GX2 Power feels like it has less feedback, but still in a similar realm as the Joola Pro 4. The next thing I would say is that, in my opinion, the GX2 Power hits harder than the Joola Pro 4. Now, there's a couple things I want to preface this with. The Hyperion 16mm that we have does not have a ton of hours on it. Specifically, our Perseus 14mm, Scorpius 16, and Scorpius 14 are probably what have the most amount of hours, and it does seem like the Pro 4s loosen up just a little bit as they get used more. So maybe once it crosses that threshold, the paddles would be a little bit more comparable than they are now. But right now, as the Gearbox sits and that Hyperion 16mm sits, I felt like the Gearbox had more power overall. I wouldn't say it's this massive gap. If I had to put it on a chart, the Hyperion would sit here and the Gearbox would sit here. We're not talking about something like this. It is a pretty small amount, but I do think it's enough that most players, if they pick them both up, would probably notice it. And on that same note, I've never felt like the Joola Pro 4 16mm models were all that easy to control. In fact, in my original review, you may remember me saying that it just felt less predictable to me and I didn't really know how to swing. Well, after using the GX2 Power, I actually feel like it was easier for me to control some of my shots on the Joola than it was the Gearbox. That's not to say that the Gearbox is fully unpredictable, but there were certain shots where I was like, when I put this amount in, I wasn't quite getting what I expected out, and suddenly the Joola felt a little bit more predictable to me. Next is the sweet spot. So when I compare these side by side, I don't feel like it's a fully fair comparison because I am comparing a hybrid to an elongated paddle. So in terms of stability, it's not gonna be a one-to-one, but at least with those two paddles specifically, the GX2 Power Hybrid and the Hyperion, I did feel that the GX2 Power had a larger sweet spot. Or at a minimum, when I would miss off center, there was more energy coming off of the Gearbox than there was the Hyperion 16mm. I still think both have very good sweet spots, but if I had to pick a winner here, it would be the GX2 Power. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this comparison, and potentially is one of the biggest selling points of why you would want to pick up the Gearbox, is the durability. Gearboxes have historically always kind of been built like a tank. I would say of all the paddles on the market, they're going to be on the more durable side. They have had paddles that were less durable than others. I would say the Pro Power Elongated kind of made them take a hit in terms of durability. But overall, as a brand, I think they have been able to engineer their paddles to be more durable than a lot of the polymer competitors out there. And now with the Pro 4, as we've seen more higher and higher level players use them and they've been in the market longer, we have started to see more core crushing issues. Certainly not nearly to the extent of last year with the Gen 3s. I would say it's a great improvement from there, but it is still happening. So if you're getting a lot of the experience of the Joola Pro 4 on this GX2 Power, and now you can combine it with better durability, that I think is going to be a gigantic selling point for the Gearbox. Now, one of the things that the Gearbox doesn't have, that Joola does have, is significantly more shape options. To my knowledge, the GX2 Power, at least for now, is only gonna have this hybrid and one elongated with a slightly shorter handle, whereas Joola has multiple elongated shapes and a wide body shape. They don't really have a true hybrid, but overall, there are more shape options with Joola than there are Gearbox. So that could be something that would sway you to continue using a Pro 4 over the Gearbox. Now I know it probably feels like I'm ragging on the Pro 4 here and that I'm just saying it's inferior to the GX2 Power in every way. I don't think that's true at all. I think you could pick either of these paddles and be a very happy person, especially if a power paddle is what you're looking for. To me, the biggest negative with the Pro 4 and the biggest positive for the GX2 is going to be their SST core likely being more durable. Of course, we can't say that for sure yet, but historically with gearboxes, that core holds up better than the polymer Gen 3 cores that we've seen. But I still think there's gonna be a lot of people out there who prefer a Pro 4. Maybe you like that more connected feel. Maybe you want that wide body with a slightly longer handle. Maybe you just like the longer handle, elongated shape options that you get with Joola. So no, I wouldn't go out and say that all of a sudden the Pro 4 is obsolete, but I do think in a lot of ways the GX2 Power takes some of the things that are good about the Pro 4 and makes it even better. And that's not something you've really ever been able to say with Gearbox. There's always been one major flaw with a Gearbox that holds it back from being a top tier paddle, and this is the first time ever that I think Gearbox has finally made a paddle that doesn't have that drawback. Whether it was it didn't have enough spin, the sweet spot was too small, or the paddle was too head heavy, there was always something. Now I just don't really know what I would say is worse if you're looking at power paddles. So yeah, those are some of my first impressions at the moment. And if you're looking for a power paddle, this is going to be one that I think a lot of people should consider, especially if you're looking at a Pro 4 already. Now, of course, if you're not a power paddle user, then this probably isn't one that I would recommend. I do think you sacrifice some of your control for the power that it's getting. But for myself right now, this is a paddle that I'm heavily considering as my main. I would say at the moment, the top two paddles for me are the Honolulu J2NF and this GX2 Power. At the moment, I'm thinking the J2NF is probably better overall for my game than the GX2 Power, but the GX2 Power is a ton of fun to use and I'm really liking it. Well, anyways, this ended up being kind of long for a first impressions video, but hope you guys got some value out of it, and I'll catch you in the next one.